Hey guys, we're here again today at Hardracing, working on our KTM RC390 project bike. Today we're going to be installing a Galfer upgrade kit, which is going to be the wave rotors and the HH pads. Galfer is one of the best braking companies on the planet. It's been making brakes for a very, very long time. They use the best materials, the quality, fit, everything on it is stellar. Not only are the wave rotors lighter than your stock ones, but with the wave design and the grooves cut out of it, they also dissipate heat a lot better. The materials that they're made out of is a better steel than what comes on the bike, so you have a better coefficient of friction. Full float carriers, of course, which makes them dissipate heat, less chance for warpage, and of course, lighter weight is less unsprung mass, less rotating mass, which is of course going to benefit your bike multiple ways. It'll handle better, turn in a little quicker, accelerate faster, and brake faster. And then better brake pads, of course, more friction, more stopping power. So we're going to go ahead and show you how to install these real quick and easy. And we've already done testing with the bike in stock brake trim. Some 40 to 0s panic stops and 50 to 0 panic stops. And once we install these, get them bedded in, we're going to go ahead and test these as well and compare the difference. For us, the brakes, you can never have too good of brakes. Some people may find the stock ones are just fine, but for us, it's always better to have better brakes, and the main reason is safety. We ride on the street and people pull out in front of you, people switch lanes in front of you, dog, cat, whatever run out in front of you. It's having better brakes that stops faster, even if it's just 5, 10, 15 feet faster, could be the difference between going through the back window of a car or stopping in time before you hit the car. So for us, it's not a matter of, well, do you really need better brakes? I mean, the stock ones are fine. It's if you can get better brakes and stop faster, then that's going to be a good thing, because eventually, after, thousands and thousands of miles, somebody's bound to pull out in front of you, cut you off, or something where you have to do a panic handful of brakes. So, alright, so first thing you want to do is go ahead and loosen all the bolts before you put the bike up on the race stand. That way it's a lot less stress on the race stand, less stress on the bike, yanking and pulling and tugging, especially the axle nuts, because there are like 40 some odd foot-pounds of torque on those things. So loosen all the bolts for the wheel and everything you need to take the wheel off. And even it's also recommended, if you want to make yourself a little less of a hassle, you can loosen your rotor bolts as well, just a little bit. You don't have to turn them all the way out, just enough so that they're broke free. So then once you've taken the wheel off, you're not trying to wrestle to loosen those up on the ground. Now if you have an air impact wrench, then obviously it doesn't matter, but if you're doing it by hand, it's a lot easier to loosen these things while they're on the bike. And the same thing, of course, the axle nuts and the calipers. Alright, so quick edit, something we just found out, which is actually pretty cool. You can actually remove the front wheel without pulling off the caliper. So you can go ahead and just leave that on. You will need to loosen that little screw there to pull the pin out to release the pads, but you can leave the caliper on the fork, which is also nice because there's wires here for the ABS and the sensors and stuff, which then wind up getting pulled on while the caliper's dangling. So you can leave that on there. Alright, so once you get the wheel off, you're going to go ahead and remove the rotor by pulling out each of the bolts. And just be careful, obviously you don't want to damage the ABS ring. It's not that fragile, but just be careful, don't bang it with the wrench or toss it, drop it, step on it, or anything like that. Alright, so once you got your old one off, then you go ahead and put the new one on and take your ABS ring, line up the holes, and Loctite. Put blue Loctite on these things. They have some leftover residual while the color of the OEM stuff may be red, it's not true red Loctite. Otherwise, you'd have to be heating these things up to 300 degrees again loose. So, blue Loctite's what you want to put on it. Always use Loctite. And what you want to do is you want to tighten these down until each one's snug but not cranked down. You want to do it like a car wheel. Nice and even across, crisscross. The biggest thing though is don't torque a bolt down until all the other ones are snug first. That way you keep the alignment good on them. Really important. Notice as soon as it hits, I'm stopping. Otherwise, you're going to be torquing the crap out of these. So once you get them all tight, snug, then you can go ahead and torque them down to 22 foot-pounds. And again, make sure you're crisscrossing them. If they're not all the way tightened down, tighten a little bit more. So ensure that you don't accidentally misalign something or damage something from torquing it down wrong. That's it. Now it's installed, good to go. So, something we just checked, we measured the weight of the stock rotor versus the weight of the Galfer rotor. And the weight savings was almost 1.5 pounds. So we saved almost 1.5 pounds of unsprung mass, which is huge in the world of spinning mass, because basically the faster it spins, the more that mass becomes a heavier weight. So taking that much weight off of the front wheel is huge. It's going to make the bike handle better, turn in faster, accelerate better, and brake faster. So that was definitely a big thing. And before we put the wheel back on, if you've ever pulled a wheel off and then put it back on, these spacers, basically all factory spacers, have a tendency to fall out, especially when you're pushing it in there. You get caught on something, they just fall right out because they're flat, smooth surface. So we love these driven captive spacers. We put them on all our bikes. They work amazing. They're aluminum, so they're lighter. Not much, but it's lighter. But the beauty of it is they have this lip on it. What that lip does is that gets wedged in behind the dust seals on the wheels so that when you bump them, they don't just fall right out. It makes installing tires or installing your wheel on your bike so much nicer. Yes, they can still get pulled out if you put enough force on it, but these things sometimes will just fall out. They don't even have to be bumped. The dust seal eventually wears out and just gets soft, and they just fall out. Where these things have to be yanked out. So something to consider. Obviously, it's, if you're racing, it's almost a must. But even for street guys, it's really, really nice to have these. And putting them in there is just no different. You just basically put them in diagonally, wedge them in there, and just rotate it as you push them in there. And that's it. But now, I'm putting on probably 10 pounds, 15 pounds of force, and they're not coming out. Where these things, you just bump them and they fall out. So now when you put the wheel back on, and if you bump it with the fork leg, also for the rear, if you bump it with a sprocket key or whatever on the swing arm, they don't just fall out. So it's definitely something to consider if you're ever planning on taking the tire off or on which almost everybody will at some point, you might as well get them because it's just so much nicer. There's nothing more frustrating than having your captive, or not having captive wheel spacer and just having them fall off every time you're trying to put your wheel in there. If you have somebody with you, not such a big deal. But when you're trying to line up a tire and push in an axle and do all that crap and the spacer keeps falling out, it's a total pain in the butt. Alright, so all you gotta do is go ahead and pull this little pin out here. Real easy. And then you take a little Torx wrench and put it in reverse. And then put a little pressure on the spring plate in the back while you pull out with the bolt. And then the spring falls out and the pads are released. That easy. Now you can swap them out real simple and quick. Alright, so all you do is just take the new pads, slide them in from the bottom. And then take your spring and make sure the arrow pointed upwards. And you want it to sit in there like that. So make sure it's like this, not like that. Otherwise it'd be sitting on top of it. You want it inside the pocket. Alright, and once you get that in there right, go ahead and take the pin. You gotta push down on the spring to relieve the pressure. And then slide it all the way over to the other side. And then take your Torx wrench and tighten it up. Now this is very important here. Once you torque it down, make sure you put your safety pin back in there. That goes right in that groove on the back side of this plate right here. The only way to see it is to stick your head back in there, but you need to make sure that pin goes back on there. That's a safety feature so that this pin can't accidentally slide out and then your pads are gone. Alright, once you got your caliper and pad in there, you go ahead and reinstall your wheel, hopefully with your captive spacers, so that you don't have them fall out while you're putting your wheel back in. Okay. Real quick point out, the ABS sensor is right behind the front fender and it's really close, so do not jar your wheel and yank it back and forth. That's probably another good reason to have that caliper already on there, because that's less chance for you to go this way and that way and damage the sensor. So make sure you're looking at right down from the front and you're keeping a very careful line to go straight in, not sideways or cockeyed to where you're going to damage that sensor. So once you got it lined up on there, go ahead, put in your little world's babiest, smallest axle nut. And what you want to do is make sure that your pads are centered with your rotor and your wheel is centered with your caliper. It should spin with just a little bit of friction, but it shouldn't be too much, otherwise something's out of alignment. So go ahead, get it squared. Then you go ahead and tighten down your pinch bolts and your axle nut, and then you're going to spin your wheel as fast as you can, slam on the front brakes as hard as you can, and that's going to jerk your pads to get the best alignment with your rotor. That way you have the least amount of drag and the most even pressure, because if one pad shifts too far over in the caliper, then you wind up having excess drag on one side and a greater chance to warp your rotors. Alright, so one thing you want to do, there is always going to be grease, junk, grunge, packing, whatever, on the rotor surfaces, So take some brake contact cleaner and just go ahead and wipe them down before you go out and ride the first time. So that way your pads have a nice clean surface to start out on. You don't want to have any undue grease and grunge on there that will take away from your braking characteristics. So again, this is just something that we recommend doing. As you can see, the black crap on there, because there's always going to be some kind of, whether it was your hands, your grease from your hands, and that way the rotor is nice and clean. And per the manual, what you want to do is tighten down the axle nut first down to spec, which is 19 foot-pounds, basically 20, and then spin the wheel, lock up the brakes to align the pads, and then put it down on the ground, bounce a few times, and tighten up the pinch bolts on the opposite side on the fork, and those go to 11 foot-pounds. Alright, next you want to go ahead and remove your rear wheel by taking off the axle and sliding out the wheel. Alright, so when you pull out the axle, you're going to take the tire wheel, slide it out very carefully. Again, the speed sensor's right there, so be careful. You're taking it out. And as you can see, we already have our captive spacers in the rear installed. We did that earlier when we pulled off the wheel. So much nicer. So now you're going to go ahead and unbolt those. Unbolt your, actually you'll first undo the ABS sensor, then you'll unbolt the rotor, and then you'll swap it out. Alright, so once you got the old one off, you put the new one on. Remember, blue Loctite on all of these bolts here. Don't forget to do that. And again, same as the fronts. Lightly turn them in. And then torque them down to 22 foot-pounds. Make sure to crisscross them just like you do lug nuts on a car. And obviously, make sure that the Galfer writing and the part numbers are facing out. And then go ahead and install your ABS ring. Again, blue Loctite, and these go to 5.5 foot-pounds. Alright, and to swap out the rear pads, it's super simple. Basically just pop these two pins out. And the pads just come right out. Super easy. And putting the new ones in, this is the same exact process, just in reverse. Slide them in and make sure, reach underneath, that they go all the way into the groove. There's a groove in the front that holds the front of the pads. You don't want them swinging down. Take the pin, slide it through, and just double check those pads are solid inside there. And then take the pins, safety pins, put those back in there. And there you go. That's simple. And just like we did on the front ones, wipe them down with some brake cleaner, contact cleaner. Get any oil residue, grease, fingerprints, whatnot off of the rotors so that your pads have a good, clean compound or rotor surface to grab onto. Because the whole point is you want good transference of pad material to the new rotors to get the best braking performance. And next we're going to go ahead and install the wheel back on. Again, just like we mentioned in the front, be very careful. The manual recommends removing the ABS sensor, but as long as you're very careful not to jam it in sideways, get it all cockeyed and stuff, should be okay. But just take your time sliding in there. Don't just jam that thing in there. You don't want to damage your ABS sensor or your ABS ring. Little trick that we learned a long time ago after switching wheels 100 times a season road racing, to whenever you tighten down your axle nut, these chain adjusters have a tendency on the right side to creep back, and that throws your alignment out for the wheel. So what we use is a little screwdriver, stick it in the sprocket, back it up. You're not trying to destroy your sprocket. Some extra tensile pull on the wheel, and you'll notice now this nut is not tightened down all the way yet, but this chain adjuster isn't sliding around because there's so much force pulling it forward. So if you do that, again, you're not trying to turn it all the way around to the back of the sprocket and damage anything. You're putting just enough to where your chain is guitar string tight, and you can then tighten down your axle nut, and then once you release, then your chain should have enough tension in it like it's supposed to, and your tire will be aligned correctly as per your chain adjusters. And you want to torque the rear to 63 foot-pounds. And you release your screwdriver. Make sure your wheel's turning square. Check your chain tension. Should be a little bit off the bottom of the swing arm. And now your last thing you're going to do, like you did in the front, spin the tire as fast as you can, smack down on the brakes as hard as you can, and that will jerk your pads into alignment as best as possible. And again, it's even more important on the rear because your rear rotor is fully mounted to the wheel. There is no carrier to let it float a little bit. So if your pads are out of alignment, they're going to rub real hard on one side versus the other one, and everything's going to prematurely wear. So make sure to do that. Spin it real fast, slam on the brakes, and you should have good, true pad alignment. Alright, so now we've got our Galfer wave rotors installed, our Galfer HH pads, front and rear. Now it's time to go break them in properly, get some wear, some transfer from the pad down to the rotor. And once we do that, then we'll go do some 50 mile to 0 panic stops, 40 mile to 0 panic stops, and compare them to our stock measurements, and then we'll have a good idea on how much better performance you get out of this brake upgrade. So in addition to this, if you want to take it one last step farther, you would take this archaic old school master cylinder and swap it out for a Brembo RCS 15 master cylinder. Like this one. This thing is amazing. Not only do you have the folding lever, which heaven forbid you fall over, your bike falls over, you crash, whatever, it folds up. You smack it back down, you can actually get back. It's got an adjustable leverage ratio system. It's a 15mm fixed diameter bore, but the leverage system allows you to go between, right here, I'll show you that, between 20 and 18. Basically it's changing where the leverage is inside the back of the lever, basically where the plunger, the alignment of it, farther out, farther in, so you can get a harder feel or a softer feel by applying how much leverage you have onto the piston. In addition to that, it comes with a brake light switch and an optional brake reservoir bracket kit we offer, but this is hands down, for a single caliper setup, the RCS 15 is absolutely, hands down, an amazing upgrade. So if you want to take it to the next level after you've done the brakes, this is the last piece of the puzzle. Changing this will be the icing on the cake for an incredibly awesome upgraded brake system.